The marble floor of the private courthouse room echoed softly under her slow steps. Every movement felt heavier than the last, not because of fear, but because of what she was about to end. She placed one hand gently on her swollen belly, the other holding a folded divorce document that had already been signed by her trembling fingers. Outside the glass walls, 2 black cars waited. Men in suits stood motionless like statues. No one spoke, no one dared, because the man waiting inside that room wasn't just her husband. He was the most feared name in Seoul's underground world, a Korean mafia boss who never lost control. Until today, the door opened, and silence broke. He stood there, tall, calm, cold, black suit, no tie, no emotion, just eyes that had burned through empires and people alike. But the moment his gaze landed on her, something changed. Not anger, not indifference. It was confusion, then stillness, because she was 8 months pregnant, and she was alone. "You came," he said finally, voice low like distant thunder. She didn't look at him. "I said I would." His eyes dropped for the first time, not to her face but to her stomach. A flicker, just a flicker, gone almost instantly. But it was there. "You shouldn't have come like this," he said. She let out a soft breath that almost sounded like laughter. "I shouldn't have married you either, but I did that too." The air tightened. His guards outside shifted slightly, sensing something they had never seen before. Their boss, silent. She stepped forward and placed the documents on the table. "I signed everything." Her voice was steady, too steady, like she had practiced breaking her own heart. He didn't move, didn't touch the papers, just looked at her hands. Small tremors, fatigue hiding under her strength. "You're carrying my child," he said finally. A statement, not a question. Her eyes finally lifted. "And that's exactly why I can't stay." That sentence hit harder than any bullet he had ever survived. For the first time, his jaw tightened, not in anger, but restraint. Something inside him cracked but didn't break fully. "Sit down," he said suddenly. "I'm not here to negotiate." "I didn't ask," he replied. A pause. Then something unexpected happened. He pulled out a chair, not for her, but beside her, like he was afraid she might collapse before he could finish whatever this was becoming. She didn't sit. Instead, she said quietly, "Do you remember when you told me I'd never survive your world?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, I did." Another pause. Her hand pressed lightly on her stomach. "I tried to believe you were protecting me when you pushed me away after the marriage." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, a shift buried deep. "You were never meant to be part of this life," he said. "And this child?" she asked softly. Silence, the kind that screamed louder than words. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Then the door behind them slammed open. A man rushed in, breathing hard. "Boss, there's movement from the North Syndicate. They know she's here." The atmosphere changed instantly. The mafia boss didn't even look back. "Handle it," he said coldly. But his eyes stayed on her, and for the first time, he didn't look like a boss giving orders. He looked like a man afraid of losing something. She noticed it, and it unsettled her more than anything else. "I shouldn't be your weakness," she whispered. "You were never a weakness," he replied immediately. Too fast, too honest. That broke something between them. A silence stretched. Long, heavy, alive. Then she moved to turn away. That was when it happened. A sudden contraction. Her breath caught. Her hand gripped the table. Pain flashed across her face. Instantly he was there. Not sitting, not thinking, just moving. Fast, uncontrolled. For the first time in years, the mafia boss lost his composure completely. "Call the doctor," he barked. His voice shattered the calm. The guards outside froze. No one had ever heard him raise his voice like that. She tried to step back. "I'm fine, oh, you're not." His hand hovered near her but didn't touch, like he was afraid even contact would break something fragile. Another contraction hit. She bent slightly. And suddenly he didn't care about the divorce papers anymore. Didn't care about the syndicates. Didn't care about anything outside that room. He lifted her. Without hesitation, she froze. "What are you doing? Stopping you from dying in front of me," he said bluntly. The ride to the private medical facility was chaos. Sirens without sirens. Black convoy moving through silent streets. She sat in tea. He back seat, breathing unevenly. He didn't let go of her hand. Not once, even when she tried to pull away. "I can handle it," she whispered. "I know," he said. Then softer but not alone. That was the first time his voice wasn't steel. It was something else, something buried, something human. When they arrived, doctors rushed in. She was taken inside immediately. He was stopped at the door. No one else allowed, a nurse said. For the first time in years, the Korean mafia boss was forced to wait, outside, helpless. Minutes stretched. Then an hour. Then more. His men stood far away. No one dared speak. He stood still. But his hands, they were shaking. Not from fear of enemies. Not from war. From something far worse. Loss. Then a sound from inside. A cry. A newborn's cry. Sharp. Real. Life. The door opened slightly. A nurse stepped out, looking at him carefully. "You can come in." He didn't move immediately, like he was afraid the world might collapse if he did. Then he walked in, slow, controlled, until he saw her, lying there, sweaty, exhausted, alive, and beside her a child, small, breathing, real. For a moment the IA boss didn't speak, didn't move, didn't breathe properly. Then he stepped closer, and something in his expression finally broke completely, but no one in the room could tell what it was turning into. The room stayed silent long after the first cry faded. That sound still echoed in his chest, like it had broken something permanent inside him. He stood by the hospital bed, motionless, watching her try to steady her breathing while the baby was carefully cleaned and wrapped nearby. A daughter. They had told him it was a girl. He didn't react, not at first, but his eyes didn't leave her for even a second. "You shouldn't be standing," he finally said. His voice was lower now, rougher, as if the night had taken something from it. She turned her face slightly away. "I'm fine." He almost laughed, but it didn't come out. "Every time you say that, you end up in a hospital." A pause. The machines beeped softly around them. Outside the glass walls, guards stood like shadows. No one dared enter unless ordered. But inside that room, he wasn't their boss. He wasn't anything, just a man standing too close to something he didn't know how to hold. The baby moved slightly in the nurse's arms. Her tiny fingers curled, and something shifted in his expression again. Not softness, not fully, something closer to disbelief. "She looks," he started. He stopped, as if the word itself was dangerous. "She looks like you," the nurse finished quietly. Silence hit again. He didn't respond. But his gaze sharpened, focused now entirely on the child, like he was studying something unfamiliar, something that belonged to him, but didn't obey him. Then a knock at the door. One of his men entered carefully, bowing his head. "Boss, the North Syndicate situation is escalating. They're saying your absence confirms weakness." The words hung in the air. Weakness. He didn't turn, didn't even blink. "Handle it," he said flatly. The man hesitated. "They're mobilizing faster than expected," I said. "Handle it." The voice was calm again. Too calm. The man left immediately. The door closed, and the silence returned. She watched him now. Really watched him. Not the man everyone feared. Not the name whispered in underground rooms. But the man standing beside a hospital bed, refusing to look away from a newborn child. "You should go," she said suddenly. His eyes shifted slightly toward her. "Where?" "Back. Keep your world." A pause. "Then I am in my world," he replied. Her lips tightened. "That's not what I meant." He finally looked at her fully, and for a second, something unguarded passed through his eyes. "You think I have a separate life I can return to?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer, because she already knew the truth. There wasn't one anymore. The baby let out a small sound again. This time, the nurse gently placed her in the bassinet beside the bed. And then it happened. The moment no one in that room expected. He moved closer, slowly, like approaching something that might disappear if touched too hard. His hand hovered above the baby, stopped. Then he hesitated again. The same man who ordered deaths without blinking, now unable to touch a sleeping infant. "She won't break," the nurse said softly. Something in his jaw tightened. "I know." But he still didn't move, until finally one finger lowered, light contact, the smallest touch, and the baby's hand instinctively wrapped around it. Instantly, his breath stopped, completely. He froze like the world had paused just for that moment. Her tiny grip was weak, unaware, but it held him like nothing ever had, and for the first time the Korean mafia boss didn't know how to pull away. Behind him she watched quietly, her expression unreadable. "You can let go," she said softly. He didn't respond, because he couldn't, not yet. Not while something so small was holding something so dangerous together. His finger was still trapped in the newborn's tiny grip, as if the world had quietly decided that this fragile contact was stronger than everything he had built. He didn't move, didn't breathe properly. Even the machines in the room seemed quieter now. Then the baby shifted slightly, still asleep, still unaware of the storm she had stopped without trying. Only then did he slowly pull his hand back, like letting go of something sacred. He stepped away from the bassinet. One step, then another, creating distance like it was a habit. But this time, it didn't feel natural. It felt forced. "You're shaking," she said quietly. His eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm not?" A pause, then her voice softened. "Yes, you are." That made him stop completely. Not because she challenged him, but because she was right, and he hated that she could see it so clearly. A knock broke the moment. One of his top lieutenants entered without waiting for permission this time. His face was tense. "Boss, it's worse than expected. The North Syndicate has targeted 3 of our routes. They're not waiting anymore." The air shifted instantly. The man in front of her disappeared. The Mafia boss returned. Cold, controlled, dangerous. "Evacuate the eastern line," he said immediately. "Cut communications on the west, and shut down internal leaks. Now." The lieutenant nodded quickly and left. The door closed. Silence again. But it wasn't the same silence anymore. It felt divided, like something inside him was standing in 2 places at once. He turned back toward her. She was watching him, not afraid, not impressed, just tired. "You can't stay here," he said finally. She blinked slightly. "I just gave birth." "I know. And you're talking about leaving. I'm talking about safety." She gave a short, quiet laugh that had no humor in it. "Your version of safety usually involves guns and graves. That hit differently." He didn't respond immediately, because she wasn't wrong, and for once he didn't have a fast answer. The baby stirred again in the bassinet. A small sound. Life continuing like nothing else mattered. He looked at her again. Lowered voice. "You signed the divorce papers." She nodded. "I did." A pause. "So why are you still here?" That question lingered longer than expected. She slowly looked down at her hands. Tired, empty, still shaking slightly from everything she had just survived. "I didn't have anywhere else to go," she said simply. That answer landed heavier than any attack report. For the first time, his expression changed in a way no one else would ever recognize. Not anger, not control. Something closer to realization. Outside the hospital floor, footsteps echoed sharply. Too many, too fast. His men reacted immediately over the comms. Boss movement outside the facility. Unknown vehicles approaching. His eyes sharpened instantly. He moved toward the door without hesitation, but stopped halfway, looked back at her, at the baby, at both of them in the same fragile space. Then he did something no one expected. He turned to one of his guards outside. "Lock this floor down. No one enters without my order." The guard hesitated. "But sir, now." The door shut firmly. Then silence returned again. He walked back toward her. This time slower. Different. Not like a boss. Like someone making a decision he couldn't undo. "You stay here," he said. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "And you?" He didn't answer right away, because outside those walls, everything was burning closer. But inside that room, something else had started. Something he couldn't leave behind even if he wanted to. "I'll handle it," he finally said. She studied him for a long moment. Then, quietly, "You always say that before everything falls apart." That time, he didn't deny it. Instead, he turned toward the door again, but before leaving, he paused, just once, and looked back at the bassinet, at the child, at the reason the world suddenly felt louder and more dangerous than before. Then he left, and for the first time in years, he didn't know if he was walking toward control or away from it. The corridor outside the hospital room turned into a controlled storm. Men in black suits moved fast, silent, precise. Doors locked automatically as security systems activated, but the tension in the air wasn't just protocol anymore. It was warning. He walked through it without hesitation. Every step shifting him further away from the room he had just left and closer to the war waiting outside. One of his lieutenants approached immediately. "Boss, they're not just watching. They've surrounded the lower perimeter. This is a direct move." He didn't slow down. "How many?" "At least 20 armed units, possibly more inside civilian disguise." A brief pause. Then his voice turned colder. "Seal all exits. No engagement inside the hospital unless necessary." The lieutenant hesitated. And the civilians? That question lingered half a second too long. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Protect them, he said simply. They continued moving down the stairwell toward the lower levels. The hospital was no longer just a hospital. It was a target, and inside it she was still in that room, unaware of how quickly the world outside had begun to collapse again. Back inside the private recovery suite, she shifted slightly on the bed, exhausted but awake. The baby slept beside her in the bassinet, small, peaceful, too peaceful for the tension that had just left the room. She looked toward the door, empty, quiet, too quiet. Something about that silence felt wrong. She pushed herself slightly upright, wincing. A nurse entered quickly. "Please lie back down. What's happening?" she interrupted. The nurse paused. A professional smile tried to form, but failed. "Security protocols," the nurse said carefully. That was not an answer. She knew it. Outside the window, distant flashing lights reflected faintly across the glass. Her breath slowed. Not fear, recognition, because she had lived inside his world long enough to know silence like this never meant peace. It meant preparation. Downstairs, the first explosion wasn't loud. It was controlled, a suppressed blast at the service entrance. Clean. Intentional. The mafia boss didn't react emotionally. He simply turned his head slightly. Contact. One of his men reported instantly. Then, everything moved at once. Gunfire echoed through the lower corridor. Not chaotic, strategic. His side responded immediately. Doors sealed, routes cut off, trained men positioning like a moving chessboard. But something was different this time. He wasn't just defending territory. He wasn't just protecting an asset. He was calculating distance. Between them, between her, and everything outside. Another message came through. "Boss, there's confirmation. North Syndicate leader is present on site." That made him stop walking. Slowly, very slowly. He turned. "Here?" "Yes." A pause. Then his voice dropped. "Where?" "On North Wing access corridor. Moving upward, that direction, that route." His jaw tightened for the first time, because that path led not just to him, but closer to her floor. For the first time since everything started, his pace changed. Faster, sharper, no longer controlled. The lieutenant beside him noticed instantly. "Boss!" "Clear the north staircase," he ordered. "They're already inside it. Then burn it if you have to." No hesitation, no softness, just intent. They moved, fast, down the corridor. Gunfire echoed closer now. Shouts overlapping communications. The building was no longer stable. And still in the room above, she held the baby closer instinctively as the distant vibration reached the walls. The lights flickered once, then stabilized. Her breathing slowed, not calm, focused, because she understood something now. This wasn't outside anymore. It was coming circa. Loser. A nurse rushed in again, panic-breaking professionalism. "We need to move you now." Why? The nurse didn't answer immediately. Another distant impact shook the building slightly. That was answer enough. She looked at the bassinet, then at the door, and finally whispered, "Where is he?" No response came fast enough. And that silence told her everything she needed to know. Down below, the mafia boss reached the stairwell intersection, smoke already creeping through one side. His men positioned instantly, waiting. He raised one hand. They stopped. Then footsteps above. Approaching, not random, targeted. His eyes narrowed, because he knew that rhythm. That wasn't chaos. That was someone coming directly for him. Slow, intentional, personal. And in that moment, for the first time since the war began, he wasn't thinking about control. He was thinking about how close the next step would bring the enemy to the one room he could not afford to lose. The footsteps in the stairwell grew heavier, closer, measured, deliberate, not rushing, not panicking. Someone who knew exactly where they were going. The mafia boss stood at the base of the sty. Right, motionless, listening. Every echo sharpened his focus. One of his men leaned in. "Boss, it's him, the North Syndicate leader. He's heading straight for the upper levels." Pause, then the quiet reply. "Let him come." His men tensed instantly, but he didn't raise his voice. Didn't give another order, because now it wasn't about strategy. It was about interception and distance. Above them, the hospital corridor lights flickered again. On the upper floor, she held her baby tighter as the sound of distant movement finally became impossible to ignore. The nurse beside her was shaking slightly. We have to evacuate now, she insisted. She didn't move immediately. Where is he? She asked again. No answer, only silence. And that silence confirmed everything. She slowly swung her legs off the bed, ignoring the nurse's protests. The baby made a soft sound, small, fragile. That sound anchored her more than anything else. I'm not leaving without knowing where he is, she said firmly. Downstairs, the mafia boss began ascending, step by step, not fast. Controlled. His coat barely moved as he climbed. Every sound around him was filtered out. Only one thigh. NG mattered now. Distance closing. The lieutenant followed closely. Boss, the upper floor is not secured. She's still there. That sentence changed the air. Instantly, his expression didn't shift much, but something inside him tightened. She stays protected, he said flatly, especially if he cut in, and kept walking. Above, the North Syndicate leader reached the middle landing. He stopped, for the first time, smiled faintly. You're still cleaning up your mess personally? He called out. His voice echoed through the stairwell. Cold. Mocking. The mafia boss didn't answer immediately. Then you're in my building, he replied calmly. A short laugh came from above. Not for long, then gunfire erupted. Fast, sharp, echoing through concrete. His men reacted instantly, taking positions. But the exchange was different this time, tighter, more aggressive, because both sides understood something now. This wasn't territory, this was proximity. And upstairs she heard it. The sound shattered the fragile calm of the room instantly. The nurse rushed toward her. Please now. This time she stood, holding the baby. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were not. Another loud impact shook the corridor outside. The lights flickered harder. Emergency alarms finally began to trigger, and she realized they were running out of time. Down below, the mafia boss moved through the gunfire like it wasn't even there. One step, then another. Precise, controlled, but faster now, because the closer he got to the top, the less control he had over what mattered. A bullet grazed the wall beside him. He didn't flinch. Another hit near his men. They returned fire instantly. The stairwell filled with smoke, and through it he kept moving, until finally he reached the final landing, stopped, listened. Above, only one floor separated him now, and then a sound, not gunfire, not movement. A baby's cry, faint but real. His entire body paused for a fraction of a second. Then everything changed in his expression, because now the fight wasn't just below him, it was above him too. And for the first time, the mafia boss stopped thinking about winning and started thinking about getting there in time. The baby's cry echoed again, faint, trembling, almost swallowed by the shaking building. But he has read it clearly, because everything else in the world went silent the moment it reached him. His hand tightened around the railing, not from fear, from something far more dangerous. Focus. Boss, one of his men called from below, voice strained through gunfire and smoke. We're losing visibility on the north stairwell. He didn't answer. He was already moving. Up, fast. No hesitation now. Each step sharper than the last. The mafia boss wasn't walking through a building anymore. He was cutting through it. Above him, the North Syndicate leader heard the same sound, that baby's cry, and his smile faded slightly. So it's true, he muttered. You really brought her into this. He lifted his gun slightly and continued upward. On the top floor, the hospital corridor had turned into controlled chaos. Nurses were evacuating patients. Security doors were locking down in sequence. But she stood still for 1 second longer than she should have, holding her daughter tightly. Her eyes fixed on the hallway, because she could feel it now. He was close. Too close. A nurse grabbed her arm urgently. Please, this way. She finally moved, but not before looking toward the direction of the stairwell exit, and whispering, "Don't be late," down below. The mafia boss reached the final stairwell door. He stopped, hand hovering near the handle. For the first time, his breathing wasn't steady, not because of fear, because of what waited on the other side. He pushed the door open. Smoke spilled out instantly. Gunfire cracked somewhere to his left. His men engaged immediately, but he didn't look at them. His eyes were locked upward. One floor, that's all. Then movement. The North Syndicate leader appeared at the far end of the corridor above, slow, deliberate, clapping softly. You really came all the way up here, he called out. For what? A woman who already signed away your name? Silence. The mafia boss stood below, half in shadow. Then he spoke. Say her name again, he said calmly. A pause, then a low laugh from above. She's not even yours anymore. That was the moment the air changed. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavier. The mafia boss moved fast up the final stairs. His men shouted behind him, but he didn't stop, because now there was no strategy left, only distance to close. On the upper floor, shh, I heard footsteps approaching fast. Not random, not distant anymore. Close, very close. She stopped walking. The nurse beside her panicked. We need to go now. But she didn't move, because she recognized that sound, the way it hit the floor, the rhythm. He was here. And then the door at the end of the corridor slammed open. Smoke drifted in. Gunfire echoed faintly below. And he stepped into view, blood on his sleeve, breathing slightly heavier than before. But his eyes locked instantly on her. Everything else disappeared. The evacuation, the chaos, the alarms, all gone. Just that corridor. Just her. And the baby in her arms. For a moment he didn't speak, didn't move. Then his voice, lower than anything she had heard before. You didn't leave. She swallowed hard. You told me to stay safe. A beat. Then I didn't say stay alone, he replied. And behind him footsteps approached from the smoke. The North Syndicate leader. Closer now, smiling again. Perfect, he said softly. All of you in one place. The mafia boss didn't turn. His attention never left her, but his voice dropped into something colder than before. If you take one more step toward them, he said quietly, you won't leave this floor. And for the first time the entire hallway understood. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was containment, and he was no longer controlling it. He was protecting it. The hallway felt narrower now, not because the building had changed, but because everything inside it had. The North Syndicate leader stood at the far end, gun lowered slightly, as if enjoying the tension rather than fearing it. So this is what it comes to, he said. The great boss, reduced to guarding a family he pretended didn't matter. The mafia boss didn't react, not to the insult, not to the presence. His entire focus stayed fixed on her, on the baby in her arms, on the fact that she was standing in the middle of a war she never chose. Go, he said quietly without looking away from her. She didn't move. No. Not one word. Firm. Tired. Final. That made his eyes shift slightly toward her. For the first time in the entire fight. You don't understand what's happening here, he said. I understand enough, she replied. A pause. The baby stirred softly. And that tiny movement somehow grounded everything more than tea. He guns ever could. Behind them footsteps echoed again. Closer. The syndicate leader was walking forward now, slowly, confident, touching, he said. A broken marriage, a newborn, and a man finally pretending to care. That was the moment the mafia boss moved, not toward him, but sideways, positioning himself between the threat and her without even thinking. It wasn't strategic anymore. It was instinct. The syndicate leader noticed, smiled wider. There it is, he said. The real weakness. The air tightened. And then everything exploded into motion. Gunfire erupted again. Not chaotic, targeted. His men responded instantly from behind the smoke. The hallway filled with flashes, echoes, shouting. But in the middle of it, he didn't step away from her. Not even once. She instinctively crouched slightly, shielding the baby. And for the first time, she saw him fully in action. Not as a husband, not as a man, but as something far more dangerous when something he cared about was near. He moved fast, precise, blocking angles, redirecting fire, covering space between her and everything else. The syndicate leader advanced through the chaos, laughing for. Aintley, you think protecting them changes anything? He shouted. You built this world. The mafia boss didn't answer. He only moved closer to her again, checking her, just once. You're hurt? He asked quickly. She shook her head. I'm fine. That word again. But this time he didn't argue, because he didn't have time. A sudden burst of gunfire forced his men back slightly. The syndicate leader broke through the smoke, now dangerously close. Too close. And in that split second everything narrowed. Distance disappeared. Time slowed. She held the baby tighter, and he stepped fully in front of them. Completely. The syndicate leader raised his gun. Smiling. End of the line. Silence. Even the gunfire around them seemed distant now. The mafia boss didn't flinch, didn't move, just looked straight ahead, and said one thing calmly. Not them. And then he acted. Fast. Final. A movement so precise it broke the rhythm of the entire hallway. The shot that followed didn't echo like the others. It ended them. The syndicate leader stumbled backward, shock replacing arrogance instantly. For the first time, he wasn't smiling, and in that moment of collapse, everything else stopped. Gunfire faded, smoke settled. His men regained control of the corridor within seconds, securing the remaining threats as silence slowly returned. But the mafia boss didn't move, not yet, because behind him she was still there, still standing, still holding the baby. Alive, he turned slowly, and for the first time since everything began, his voice wasn't command, wasn't control, just low, human. "It's over," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "Is it?" And in that quiet question nothing felt finished yet, only changed. The silence after the gunfire didn't feel like peace. It felt like something holding its breath. Smoke drifted slowly through the corridor, thinning with every passing second as the emergency systems began to stabilize the building. His men secured the last exits below. Footsteps faded, orders softened. But in that hallway, none of it mattered, because he was still standing in front of her, and she was still holding their daughter. Her breathing had finally steadied, but her eyes hadn't left him, not once. "You said it was over," she repeated quietly. He didn't answer immediately. Edley. For once there were no enemies interrupting him, no chaos pulling him away, just the truth sitting between them. Finally he spoke. "For them it is." A pause. Then softer, "But not for us." That line lingered heavier than all the gunfire combined. She looked down at the baby. "So small, so real." Then back at him. "You don't get to decide that alone," she said. He nodded once, not arguing, not controlling, just acknowledging. For someone who had controlled everything around him for years, that simple nod felt like surrender. The corridor lights stabilized fully now. The alarms had stopped. Outside, dawn was beginning to break through the hospital windows. Soft light spilled across the floor, war fading into morning. She shifted slightly, exhausted beyond words. "I came here to end everything," she said quietly. A bitter breath left her lips. And instead, everything changed. He stepped forward slowly, not closing distance too fast. Careful now, like even his presence had weight. "You were never meant to be in my world," he said. She looked up at him sharply. "And yet I was." Silence. The baby made a small sound again. A reminder, eh? Reality neither of them could ignore anymore. He looked at her properly now, not as someone to protect, not as someone to lose, but as someone who had already changed him without permission. "You were right to leave," he said. That made her still. His voice continued. "But I was wrong to let you think you had to do it alone." A long pause. Then he reached into his coat slowly, every movement intentional, and placed something on the small hospital table beside her. The divorce papers, still there, never finalized. She stared at them, then at him. "You didn't sign," she said. "No," he admitted. Another pause, then quieter. "I couldn't." The words weren't dramatic. They were honest, and that honesty hit harder than everything before it. She slowly reached out, touching the edge of the papers, but didn't pick them up. Instead, she whispered, "What happens now?" He looked at her, then at the child, and for the first time in his life, he didn't answer like a mafia boss. "I don't know," he said. A pause. Then, "But I know I'm not walking away." Her breath caught slightly. She didn't respond immediately. Outside, the sun rose higher, golden light, filling the corridor where violence had just ended. She finally spoke. "You built a life where no one could stand beside you." He nodded. "And you walked into it anyway." A faint, tired exhale left her. "I didn't choose that." "I know." Another silence, longer this time. Not empty, just full of everything they hadn't said before. Finally, she looked at him one last time. Not anger, not fear, just exhaustion, and something softer underneath it. "You don't get to control us," she said quietly. He nodded again. "I don't want to." That was it. No declarations, no promises of perfection, just something fragile beginning where control used to be. She slowly turned toward the window, holding the baby closer as sunlight touched the glass. Behind her, he didn't leave. He simply stayed where he was, not as a boss, not as a weapon, just a man standing still in a world that no longer obeyed him. And for the first time, he didn't try to control what came next. He chose to remain.